Long hours, little sleep, and cold weather. That's been the living conditions for Alabama Power Company line crews for the past 2 days. This crew arrived this morning from Mobile, and after getting a few hours sleep, they were working to restore electricity in Montgomery. Crew Chief Wilbert Mason says this year's ice storm can't compare to the one last year, but the work is just about as bad.
It's cold, and of course the rain is about to stop a little bit now, but it's running down your collar, you know, you kind of get wet. It's miserable working, just try it, you know. And of course the men are tired. We had to clear up our trouble before we could leave home. And we've been getting it. Like I say, they have 3 hours rest, these men have, in 2 days.
A 78-member power crew was brought into the state from Mississippi today to help the Alabama crews. Right now, Alabama Power Company officials say the work will be slow going as the crews switch from working on the main feeder lines to individual hookups for homes. The power company hopes that all their customers will have electricity by tomorrow afternoon. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News. Montgomery police say the body of 37-year-old Gloria Dent of Montgomery was found in the 800 block of Bragg Street this morning next to Lovelace School. The body was discovered by a neighbor who lived across the street from the school. Authorities say they won't know how Mrs. Dent was murdered until an autopsy is performed, but it's believed she was sexually assaulted, then murdered. Police sources say it's possible that she was strangled. A shoelace was still found around the neck of her partially clothed body. Detective Sergeant V.H. Hicks says the investigation is still in the preliminary stages.
And we believe she was probably at a local night spot in the neighborhood here and was assaulted by someone on this street or in this area. At this time, our leads are coming in slowly. We're talking to some of her friends and finding out who she was with.
How about this house here? What are you looking for, and what have you found at the house?
We found some clothing in the house and an area in the front yard that looks like where a struggle had taken place. We don't have a whole lot right there right now. We've got an evidence technician on the scene, and he's taking care of that part.
Sergeant Hicks says there's evidence to indicate Mrs. Dent's body was dragged from the vacant house at 824 Bragg Street and left by the school fence. So far, no arrests have been made in connection with the case. Governor Wallace told the group that he believes in education and what it can do for the state and nation. The ESPO, made up of school bus drivers, cafeteria workers, and janitors, are trying to get the state legislature to pass laws that will give them job security and better wages. Governor Wallace told members that it was wrong that some education support personnel don't even get paid minimum wages.
I'm going to do all that I can in the matter of increased pay for the support personnel of Alabama, especially those who are in the lowest income groups. They should have a pay raise.
The governor also promised to work with lawmakers to get legislation passed where support personnel couldn't be fired without having a fair hearing on the charges filed against them by administrators. But while the governor promised to give the workers his support, he told them that he couldn't guarantee they receive pay raises.
The governor will do his part, and our administration will do our part. We cannot promise the impossible. We cannot foresee at this moment what income we're going to have. Whether the upturn in the economy is coming next month, or this month, the month after, and that, of course, is something that bothers me very much. Because I tell you, had I not been elected governor, I'd be unemployed too. I've got to the point that the only way I can make a living is being governor of Alabama.
A lot of them pulling, a lot of them lawyers, doctors, judge, ministers. I said, I'm going to make mine.
in getting this 2-to-1, and in some cases, in terms of megatonnage, I think the figure they used was 6-to-1 capability of its target, and that it's going to be a 100% effective weapon.
The American Legion and the American Legion Auxiliary has so much to offer to our young people who want to attain an education beyond high school. And we publish a book entitled Need a Lift. And this book is available to all students if it's not in their local high schools with the counselors or the libraries, why they can secure it through the American Legion poster unit in their community. And this book offers over $4 billion worth of scholarships, of grants and loans that are available to any student who wants to further their education. Primarily, my special project, we've had an ongoing program of loans, and not necessarily loans, but grants to these children who would like to go to college of their choice, but they more or less participate and enter contests for these awards. And last year alone, the American Legion Auxiliary gave over.
The meeting in Montgomery, sponsored by the Alabama Citizens for Life organization, drew support from as far away as Birmingham and Mobile.
Thank you, Father, for ordaining, knowing us even before our births, before we saw the light of day. We thank you for the will that is yours for our lives that you have already.
It was a meeting of both philosophical ideals and practical politics.
Now, if we can't have Christian men and women in government, and there's no reason we can't, we go about it in the right way. The next best thing we can do is to have the numbers. When the numbers are there, politicians may not always move in that direction, but I can tell you they're aware of it.
There were explanations of what women go through in making the choice for or against an abortion. But the keynote speaker at the event was a minister, the founder of the Save a Life organization in Birmingham, Wales Goebel, who spent part of his time at the microphone attacking those organizations that perform abortions.
I know that when the vast majority of these young girls go into the clinics across our city and across our state and across our country, these young girls are not encouraged as to what they're about to do, because it is a money-making profit organization that is sponsoring what is destructive, and because of it, they care nothing about the emotional thought that these young girls are going to have.
A spokesman for the group says meetings like this one are designed to catch the public's attention and in turn hopefully make enough noise to be heard by the lawmakers who can help the anti-abortion cause. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Association to Montgomery and to certainly this lovely place is as safe as possible. Now, no. How about
Have you given any further thought about what you would personally like to do in the next decade?
Chris, no. I've got a son at home that was about so tall when I got to be governor, and he's almost as tall as I am now. So we got a little fishing, a little wrestling, a little boxing. We got to try each other out once again, and I'm going to spend some time there and just kind of think a while. I'd like to get something on paper about my recollections. I've never been known as a scholarly type, I don't think. And maybe some of the educators around the state will help me out a little bit, and we can get that on paper. And other than that, I have no plans.
Do you have any regrets at all about having run for office? Would you do it again?
Dennis, absolutely. You know, we've talked before. I don't think a man could have had any more fun than I've had the last 4 years. And you know, that's something else. While we're talking, I want to tell the public out there, the folks out in Alabama that elected me, that on the farms and in the shops and in the offices and in the homes, you hear these politicians holler out there and say how tough things are in Montgomery and how much stress and strain we under down here. And, how much pressure we under, and how much I'm doing for you, well, I say that's a blatant, outright misrepresentation. We're not spending our own money, we're spending the people's money out there. You should never forget that. And I've been in the Capitol 4 years, and you folks been there 4 years, and you've seen a lot of smoke, hot air. I hadn't seen the first lick passed since I've been in the Capitol. So, only thing Alabama state government needs to do is start acting like the folks out across this state that pay for it. And they got absolutely no problems in Montgomery. And I know that, and I hope that I have been able to convey that message to the people of Alabama.
Stephanie Ashmore, Northwest Alabama.
Capacity crowd at RFK Stadium witnessed the first NFC champion leave. Late in the half, Washington's number 72 Dexter Manley sacks quarterback Danny White. White suffered a concussion and would not return to action. In the third quarter, White's replacement Gary Hageboom caught fire. Here he finds Drew Pearson for a 6-yard touchdown, cutting the Washington lead to 14-10. But on the ensuing kickoff, Washington's Mike Nelms takes the ball at the 4, finds a hole, and is off to the right sideline. Nelms goes 76 yards before Dennis Thurman brings him down at the 21-yard line. 5 plays later, it'll be John Riggins, who rushed for 140 yards on the day. This time, Riggins takes it in from 4 yards out, and it's 21-10 Washington. However, as is customary, the Cowboys come back. Hageboom hits Butch Johnson on a 23-yard touchdown. Suddenly, it was 21-17. The Cowboys had life, and Butch Johnson gives it the California Quake. But the Cowboys ran out of miracles in the fourth quarter, trailing 24-17. Hageboom's pass is tipped by Dexter Manley right into the arms of Darrell Grant, an offensive lineman last year. He scores. The Redskins win it 31-17. Washington goes to the Super Bowl. The Washington Redskins, NFC champions, 1982-83.
It was just the tonic this government town needed. Instead of worrying about budget deficits, Social Security, and national unemployment, Washington went crazy over its Redskins. And the opposition was the team Washington fans loved to hate the most, the Dallas Cowboys, the Skins' fiercest rivals. The president's men were there, James Baker and Michael Deaver, Senator Laxalt of Nevada, and others. Dallas scored first on a 26-yard field goal by Raphael Septien. But the Redskins came right back with 2 touchdowns, including this 20-yard pass from Theismann to Charlie Brown. Washington was ahead by 11 points, and several blocks away at Jenkins Hill Bar on Capitol Hill, the crowd watching on TV loved it. Then just before halftime, a rough break for Dallas. Quarterback Danny White was hit hard, getting a pass away, suffered a concussion, and was out for the game. But his replacement, a 24-year-old named Gary Hageboom, threw a scare into the fans with 2 touchdown passes, and suddenly Dallas was within 4 points. But the Redskins poured it on. A kickoff return by Mike Nelms for 76 yards. And later, the play that finally put the Cowboys away, a pass batted away and picked off by a huge defensive lineman named Darrell Grant. The score was Washington 31, Dallas 17, and that's the way it ended. But not before the two teams accidentally left the field with 12 seconds still left to play. After it was over in the dressing room, the Redskins gave thanks in prayer. President Reagan called to congratulate Coach Joe Gibbs, but the coach had trouble hearing.
I can only catch part of what you're saying, Mr. President. I just thank you for the call, though.
Monday it'll be back to the dreary business of budgets and the economy here, but tonight this capital is savoring its victory over the Cowboys.
In the ACC today, Duke at North Carolina. Early on, Duke freshman Johnny Dawkins hits. Blue Devils stay close. Heels Brad Doherty, though, sneaks inside here for the jam. North Carolina up by 2. It was all heels from there. Michael Jordan on the drive, the All-American, a career and game-high 32 points. Sam Perkins hits from the 19-foot three-point range. North Carolina up by 24 in the first half. Then the subs cleaned up. Warren Martin with the rejection. Out to Michael Jordan. The relay to Steve Hale. North Carolina wins it in a rout, 103-82.
Playing on Tamarisk today, John Fout made 3 birdies to finish at 19 under par and maintain a one-stroke lead. Craig Stadler, one of 4 golfers a stroke back. He had his chances today, but couldn't get them to fall. Shot a 69 at La Quinta. Ray Floyd also played at La Quinta, started the day 3 back, but picked up 2 strokes with the help of shots like this. On 14, he chipped in for a birdie. Also a stroke back, Rex Caldwell and Keith Fergus. Amateurs played their final round today. A familiar face, Bryant Gumbel, had a little help, but still couldn't get it to go.
Odell, we usually try to do these things in a kind of a quiet setting. We didn't know all these guys were going to be watching over here. I don't guess that matters, though, does it?
No, it doesn't matter. They just want to see how well I do. I think I do pretty good.
What is Summerville, Georgia like in the summertime?
Well, it's very nice. We go fishing a lot in the summer, and that's what I love to do is fish and roller skate. Everybody roller skating. There's a lot of parties, so we have a good time in the summer.
How about basketball? Is there a lot of basketball going on year-round in Summerville?
Yes, every day.
That's where you learn to play, huh?
Yes, on the outside courts.
You give the impression of those of us who watch that you're a quiet type of guy. Is that an accurate assessment?
Well, yes, I don't talk very much, but, you know, I talk, but people just don't amuse me the way they be asking questions. You know, they ask me the same thing, so.
So you don't talk much, huh?
Yeah.
Well, is that something of a problem? You've attained some success, and of course, guys like me come calling to talk to you. Is that something you don't particularly like to do? I don't mind if you tell me.
Well, it doesn't bother me if they come and talk to him. I can really communicate with them, but now, you know, I have to deal with it since we're having a very good season this year. So I'm coming adjusted to what I'm supposed to do.
The 1% increase in the city's lodging tax is backed by the Montgomery Area Chamber of Commerce and the Hotel Motel Association. It was approved by the City Council last week, bringing the local lodging tax to 4%, which should translate to more than $500,000 this year, and half of that money will be spent to promote the city of Montgomery.
The chamber itself had not had any kind of increase for about 5 years, and we are needing additional promotional revenue in order to promote Montgomery the way we think it should be promoted. And of course, anything that the chamber does, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, part of the chamber, helps our business in bringing people here to the city.
The tax increase did not come without dispute. One city councilman was opposed to raising a tax when the city gave local residents a tax break last year. The city lowered the millage rate on property taxes after statewide property reappraisals raised city revenues.
And any department, any group wanting help or needing help should have come forward at that point and said, look, don't give this much back or we're going to need some help.
But a Chamber of Commerce spokesman says at that time there were certain events the chamber couldn't foresee, like the move of the Alabama Shakespeare Festival to Montgomery.
The Convention and Visitor Division of the Chamber of Commerce has always been funded by a lodgings tax. This is a hotel room bed tax, which is the average of Montgomery and never pays. This money goes back into promoting Montgomery, and with that we bring in millions and millions of fresh dollars into the community.
Supporters of the tax say it will help the whole city cash in on the flood of tourists they expect the increased promotions to bring.
People just can't spend as much today as they were spending a few years ago, and Montgomery is a perfect city to cash in on that now. We have a lot to offer here for people to come and visit the city, and so what we need is a force to go out and let people know about the city.
Montgomery is now on the brink of becoming a major convention and tourism destination. Through the efforts of the City Council and their leadership and other hospitality individuals, we now have the opportunity to do so.
And supporters of the tax say it comes at a very good time, with the 1984 World's Fair in New Orleans just around the corner. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
That award will be presented tonight by Mr. Your 1983 Alabama Junior Miss is Stephanie. Stephanie Ashmore, Northwest Alabama.
Your house needs proper insulation.
And when we say insulation, that means these thick packs of fiberglass or rock wool with various R values. R value means the product's ability to resist the flow of heat from a warm room to the cold outside. The higher the R value, the better the insulating power. FHA and VA require an R value of 19. And when you shop for insulation, be careful. Make sure you buy the proper kind. Home siding is not the same thing as insulation.
Insulation is very helpful and can add up to savings of between 25 and 30% if your home is properly insulated.
Now you can be led astray, can't you, when you go to buy insulation?
That's exactly right. Many manufacturers of siding are claiming energy savings when in fact siding alone can provide no energy savings unless it is installed over some type of insulation, and more times than not it's installed over some type of foamed plastic insulation.
Other tips for winterizing your home: keep your thermostat at 68 and turn it down when you're not at home, but don't turn it off completely. On cool days, pull your curtains to keep the warm air in.
The water heater is the second biggest user of energy in the home, and if the water heater's outside, maybe in a garage or in a storage room, you can insulate that. That's kind of inexpensive way to save energy and keep that heat in the tank. Turning the thermostats down on the water heater will save energy. Weather stripping, caulking, these are two items that are really inexpensive that a homeowner can upgrade or add to their home to help save energy use. Lose a lot of energy through cracks and openings, places where two different materials come together. You could put caulking, permanent, that's a permanent substance, weather stripping around those windows and doors where they're movable parts to help prevent air or heat loss in the winter.
Utility bills are highest during the summer and winter months, but if you use these tips, you can save some money. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
The council committee is trying to come up with some guidelines for liquor license approvals, standards to ensure equal and fair treatment to all license applicants. District 9's Bill Nunn is the committee chairman.
We've written and gotten guidelines from Huntsville, Birmingham, Gaston, Dothan areas, and we're kind of looking at these different ordinances that they've passed on regulating, licenses and so forth. And so we're looking at it from Montgomery in the same aspect that they have.
You have pizza?
Yeah. Well, I got MasterCard.
The committee was to report tomorrow night on one phase of its work, the issuance of liquor licenses for package stores.
The amount of information we've had to put together, the committee just feels like we haven't had enough time to really study this thing like we should and come up with some kind of recommendations at this time to the council. So we're probably not going to be able to give any kind of report tomorrow night at the council.
Members of the public will have a chance to put in their 2 cents worth tomorrow afternoon. That's when the committee holds a public hearing in the council chambers to hear even more about who should and who shouldn't get liquor licenses in Montgomery. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News. The public hearing is to help the council committee come up with guidelines for granting liquor licenses in Montgomery. The committee was formed 2 weeks ago for just that purpose. Bill Nunn is the committee chairman.
Well, right now the biggest problem is package stores. Right now we've had an influx of people who just want to put a package store on just about any corner there's availability for one, especially around Pack-A-Sacks and places like this. And so we just think from the impulse from the city of Montgomery, from the citizens, is that we don't want it there. We want to be controlled. And so we're trying to look at it so we can control this type of licensing in the city of Montgomery.
The committee was to report some early findings at tomorrow night's council meeting, but Mr. Nunn says they'll probably hold off on that until they've had more time to consider the problem. Meanwhile, the committee is looking at what other Alabama cities have used for standards in approving liquor license requests. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
It's our pleasure. Our pleasure. Thank you so much. But I'm going to do it. There you go, Doctor.
All right.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Our pleasure indeed, Mr. Walker. We're really grateful. As you know, this will make it possible for Tuskegee to continue to put out high-quality graduates in chemical engineering. We're grateful to Gulf Oil for this.
It's our pleasure. Our pleasure.
Thank you so much.
What procedure?
Segrest attorney Dudley Perry says the couple could be only one step away from regaining the land. More possible legal action by the city.
Well, there is a possibility that the city will file a petition with the court for a rehearing or for the court to reconsider this matter. I think the court has very clearly indicated that there's not very much room for reconsideration in this particular matter. But once the time has passed for their rehearing, the possibility of their reconsideration, I guess I should say, then the Segrest, by simply posting or putting into the hands of the court, once again, the $69,000 will be given a deed and title to their land.
Today, an indication that the city might not challenge the Supreme Court ruling came from Tuskegee Mayor Johnny Ford.
At this particular moment, Mr. Lump, we have not. The attorney will advise us on the details of the decision. We're very pleased whenever the court makes a decision. We have learned as a city to abide by the rules and the regulations. Whatever the decision made by the court, we would certainly abide by that. But in terms of appeal, at this particular point, we've not made a decision.
If the ruling stands, it could mean major changes for construction plans on this site for a proposed oil refinery. And so, the final chapter in this story could read, the Segrest family has 61 acres of farmland right smack in the middle of the Wallace & Wallace oil refinery. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News, Tuskegee, Alabama.
The $30 million in taxes have been held in limbo while the oil companies fight the case in court. Meanwhile, the state is hoping to convince the oil companies to drop their case, freeing up the taxes. The meetings have centered on what it would take to reach that end. Today, the attorneys and the representatives of the Wallace administration met in the offices of a local attorney. Sources close to the negotiations say the key point centers on an effort to allow the oil companies a forum to have some bills passed that would change the limitations on which wells in the state would fall under the provisions of the tax, and bills that would spread the burden of paying the tax essentially to include the stockholders of the oil companies. Coming out of the meeting, a settlement appeared close.
Well, I think there are questions on both sides, yes. Both parties have to go back and talk with their people, and of course we're all cautiously optimistic.
But both sides face a deadline. The state legislature has been put on call possibly to consider the solution tomorrow, but it must have some word by morning. The oil company representatives will meet some more tonight and a decision made by tomorrow. If the settlement doesn't come to fruition,
if we can't reach an agreement that can be carried out, then the litigation would proceed.
But Mr. Crow says there is a slim chance they'll keep negotiating even if the settlement isn't reached tomorrow. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Once and for all, just as quickly as we can in the interest of both parties.
The oil companies have been paying the higher severance tax for about 3 years, but the state hasn't been able to touch a penny of it because the oil companies have tied it up in a series of court battles. In the offices of a local attorney, both sides met to see if the matter could be resolved.
We feel like it's been going on and the matter needs to be resolved one way or the other just as soon as possible. And so we hope to be able to bring it to conclusion by tomorrow.
The oil companies have the $30 million to bargain with and the threat of keeping it tied up. The state isn't talking about what it has to offer, but sources say it's a chance for those oil companies to ask the legislature to change not the amount, but the burden of the severance tax.
I think each side understands the other's position. And I'm hopeful that something can be worked out.
Well, I don't know that there's a hang-up. We have to report back to our clients on what corrections may be necessary and get authority from them, since I'm only a lawyer, and we have to seek the instructions of my clients.
Next order of business. But the legislature cranks up tomorrow, possibly to consider the proposed solution. Mr. Crow says if the settlement isn't reached in time to hand the legislature, there's a good chance the settlement negotiations will end. And then the legislature will be forced to find the needed money elsewhere. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
But the governor has also directed that a bill be prepared to increase the amount of severance taxes from those companies, and decision would be made tomorrow sometime if that course is going to be pursued or not.
Is this direction of this legislation an attempt to put a little pressure on the side of the oil company to maybe make them come around in the negotiations tomorrow?
Well, I'm not going to say that it's just idle talk on the governor's part by any means. Don't want to give that impression. But I think the governor had much rather see this settled by agreement and the dropping of the litigation.
From tractors to gravel to typewriters, it's Jan Cook's job to know how many the state has. But that's just part of the state auditor's responsibilities. She's also a staff manager and a public relations person.
Our primary duty is to audit the Department of Finance and the Treasurer's Office. We also are allowed to audit cities. We file an annual report with the governor once a year that shows exactly what money that the state has taken in, what money they have spent, just an accounting of all of the state's money.
Qualifications for the job? Ms. Cook says all it takes is proof of residency and meeting minimum age requirements. The state auditor must be 25. Ms. Cook was sworn in at the age of 27. She's the youngest auditor in state history, managing a staff of 24. During her campaign, Ms. Cook fought a battle of what she calls rhetoric over qualifications for the office. But she says her major in political science, experience working with Senator Jim Allen and the Dozier City Commission give her the background she needs to handle the office. But she admits it won't be easy because of some financial stumbling blocks.
We're suffering from the same disease that all the other offices are suffering from, this proration. Our office has been hurt pretty badly by proration. For example, we are absent 3 employees. We're working with 27 employees, now we have 24. We have given the state, or by this I mean we have cut our budget by more than $61,000.
As for future political plans, Ms. Cook says that remains to be seen. But she intends to be visible while in office and do a good job. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Ms. Frank has been extremely helpful.
You must determine where you are before you can determine where you're going. That's why Jan Cook says she wanted to audit her office. She says during the past week, her first in office, she's been finding out how the man hours are spent. She says so far the audit is ahead of schedule and the office has a clean bill of health from the examiners of public accounts. She says proration has hurt her office, causing more than $60,000 to be cut from her budget along with 3 employees.
We hope by the survey that we have done to determine what our people are doing, that with some good management, that we can shift some of our people around and continue to do this auditing of cities. Right now, this auditing, this part of our auditing, has been, not to say completely stopped, but slowed down tremendously.
Ms. Cook is 27, the youngest auditor in state history, single, and planning to stay in politics for some years to come. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Alabama has been losing its dairy farms at a steady rate for years. Abandoned dairies can be found around every town and city in the state. There are only about a third as many dairies here now as in 1970. Less than half the milk Alabamians need is produced in Alabama, making us a dairy deficit state. But in 5 states, dairy production is much greater than the people in those states can consume. To keep those dairies in business, the government buys all surplus milk. Last year, that was a staggering 14 billion pounds of milk turned into cheese and butter. The government wants to cut the costs of the dairy support program and has tried to reduce the enormous stockpiles of cheese and butter by giving some of it away to the needy. And it tried to tax all the nation's milk producers $1 for every 100 pounds of milk they sold to offset what the government spends to support overproduction. A federal injunction in South Carolina has blocked the tax, which one Auburn dairy expert estimated would have forced 40% of Alabama's remaining dairies to fold. The fact that some dairies in Wisconsin actually sell 100% of their milk to government processing plants irks deficit state producers like Elmore County dairyman Don Horton. He says the tax would have cost him $48,000 this year, even though he and dairymen in most of the country don't receive any government payments.
I resent the fact there again that people hear about these plans and they say, well, old Don's out there reaping benefits from the government on price support, and we don't. We have a market for our milk here. We don't depend on the government to sell it, and we don't reap the benefits out of that program.
Believing the government will try again to shift some of the dairy program costs to all producers, Horton and other members of Alabama Farm Bureau's State Dairy Committee have come up with their own solution to the American dairy industry dilemma. It's legislation they say would greatly reduce surplus stocks, lower the amount of milk the government would have to buy, and cost Alabama dairymen only 1/10 of what they would have paid under the $1 tax setup. Congressmen from the populous dairy surplus states are expected to work against the bill, which would force dairies in their states to cut back milk production. But the Alabama group is building support in other deficit states.
How about it, Bucky? How you getting along over there, buddy? How's things over in Mississippi?
If the number of Alabama dairies drops even more, it will mean additional milk being brought from other states, with transportation costs upping the price 15 to 20 cents per gallon at the grocery store. Without a solution, more Alabama dairymen will lose their farms, and the state's consumers will be paying even more for out-of-state milk that is not as fresh. Holly Midgley reporting from Montgomery.
There's a rather inconspicuous building located just off of Federal Drive in Montgomery next to Gunter Air Force Station. Inside the building, the EPA stores low-level radioactive waste, mostly radium needles once used for the treatment of cancer patients. The radium is contained in a core inside the needles, which physicians use to radiate cancerous cells by inserting them directly into tumors. In the early 1960s, officials discovered that the very expensive needles started turning up in safety deposit boxes, high schools, and even sheriff's offices.
Some of the physicians would pass away, and their estate would be left a large container of radium sources. The family, not knowing what to do with it, would see that it had a very large monetary value as part of their estate. So in thinking in terms of the monetary standpoint, would then put the expensive sources in the bank.
Mr. Porter says since 1965, the lab in Montgomery has been the country's only continuously operating disposal facility for the low-level radioactive waste. For the most part, only the radium needles are stored in the concrete vaults. But in a concrete pit, there are some larger items containing low-level radioactive waste, including a vial of radium, once used by Madame Curie, who won the Nobel Prize for her work in the discovery of natural radioactivity and the isolation of radium. The 10,000 radium needles and other waste will soon be on their way to a permanent storage site. It's expected to take several days to transfer the waste into containers for the transport to Washington State. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
It's a kind of a revival for the preachers in a sense, and an inspiration, motivating kind of meeting for them to go back to their churches and do something about reaching the lost for Christ, the multitude of people in our state that are not in anybody's church. Out of a population of 3,900,000 people, in the state, there's about 1,300,000 of them, the best we can tell by several surveys, that are in nobody's Sunday school and nobody's church. And these people we want to try to reach.
We have now made this option available to customers, and we know that this is something that many customers want. They want the opportunity to purchase the phones that they've been renting, and of course this gives them the chance to make a payment, make a purchase, and discontinue the monthly rental charge that they've had. It's really a response to customer desire. When you look at the wide assortment of suppliers of telephone equipment, and of course we know that there are many customers who continue to lease our equipment, but they want the option to buy as well as the option to lease. So this gives those who want to buy the chance to go ahead and buy.
I think that we have an adequacy of availability.
The public hearing was held to give Montgomery residents a chance to advise a special council committee on how liquor licenses should be approved in the city. But most of the people who spoke to the committee were opposed to any more licenses being approved, no matter what the guidelines. Package store liquor licenses caught the most flack.
I just can't see letting this pass when people have the opportunity to get liquor at other places. Why can't we just leave our convenience stores as they are?
There were those people who took the opposite stance.
We're sort of restricting people by not allowing them to have the right, which is their right if they want to drink, to go to a particular place of business and get something to drink.
But beyond the arguments of the pros and cons of alcohol, there were suggestions for guidelines for approving license requests, among them placing a limit on the number of liquor licenses that could be held in any council district. The hearing took about an hour. Afterward, the committee members met to discuss what they had heard and try to make a little more progress on a job the committee chairman says is proving a lot tougher than he ever expected. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News at City Hall.
Do you have reason to believe that there may have been a mine collapsing? Could it have caused all this?
It looks like it. From what we discussed with Jesse on the way down, it looks like it, but we still have a lot to look at before we really know for sure what happened.
Yeah, I'm trying to sell my house. No one to buy a house down here, knowing what kind of problems we're having. Just, it's impossible to sell a house like this.
Here at home, the members of the state legislature are back for the first special session of the new George Wallace administration. They'll be hearing a call from the governor to tackle issues aimed at solving the state's financial problems. Chris Grimshaw and Dennis Latham are covering the gaveling in of the session. Chris, exactly what can we expect tonight?
Well, Bob, the call for the special session this evening arose when settlement negotiations between representatives of the Wallace administration and attorneys for oil companies broke down last night and this morning. Those settlement negotiations were aimed at freeing up some $30 million in gas severance taxes that had been paid by the oil companies but tied up in a series of court battles. The money had been tied up and they were trying to free it up, and when the negotiations broke down, Governor Wallace decided that he would introduce a bill into the legislature, or have legislators do that, that would increase that gas severance tax from 8 to 12%, according to early reports. But now legislators handling those bills say that increase will only be from 8 to 10%. Representatives of the oil and petroleum associations are somewhat hesitant to say that this is a retaliation move by Governor Wallace, but as Tom Dart, a spokesman for the Alabama Petroleum Association, says, the increased gas severance tax will have its bad effects.
It would put us at a very high rate in comparison to surrounding states, and as a matter of fact, to any state in the nation. It would certainly discourage people from coming here to look for oil or gas, and in the long run, it would probably be very detrimental to the state.
There are some other bills that are being offered by the Wallace administration in this call for a special session. One of them would allow the use of some $3.2 million from the interest income of the $520 million in oil leases that were invested, money set aside for capital projects across the state. Other bills would allow the state to hang on a little bit longer to money that is owed indebted and bonded indebtedness in other sections of the state, and other money would speed up the collection by the state of interest that it has on deposits in banks across the state of Alabama. One other bill that is not associated with any type of revenue measure would allow the Wallace administration to set up some sort of control over the prison system, and what limited control that it will have through the negotiated settlement of the prison suit. There is one bill that is not in the call for the special session, and that has left some legislators somewhat restless. And Dennis Latham is here to talk about the lack of that bill.
That's right, Chris. The governor's call failed to include legislative reapportionment. The special legislative committee that's been working for more than a year on that bill and on that remapping plan met this afternoon and discussed the likelihood that it would not be included in the governor's call. The co-chairman of that committee, Senator Lister Hill Proctor of Sylacauga, told me late this afternoon that he will introduce the legislative reapportionment bill tonight.
Committee felt that both bills, the economic bill and whatever it may be, and the reapportionment bill should be introduced at the same time, and I'm confident that the members of the legislature will address all the issues that the governor puts in the call, as well as reapportionment, so I don't really see a big problem with it.
What about the problem of new interveners?
Well, we learned not too long ago that some people had, I believe from the Black Belt, filed a motion to intervene in the federal case, and of course I can't predict what the court might do with that. But
since the reapportionment issue is not in the call, more votes will be needed to pass the legislative remapping bill, a 2/3 vote rather than a simple majority. The adverse effect of this on the eventual passage of the legislative reapportionment bill is not known at this time. Live from the Capitol, Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Of course, an update on what happens in the beginning of today's special session on tonight's 10 o'clock report.
As promised, bills to redraw legislative districts were introduced in the House and Senate. Because reapportionment isn't in the special session called, it'll take a 2/3 vote instead of a majority vote to pass both houses. Shortly after the reapportionment bill was introduced in the Senate by Lister Hill Proctor of Sylacauga, lawmakers were lined up to complain that they hadn't seen the bill and wouldn't have time to prepare amendments to it for Wednesday's scheduled committee hearing. Lieutenant Governor Bill Baxley sent the bill to the Governmental Affairs Committee instead of the Judiciary Committee, where such legislation has traditionally gone. The bill's sponsor says no significance should be attached to the committee assignment. Hueytown's Mac Parsons introduced a bill in the Senate to increase the maximum weekly unemployment payment in some cases from $90 to $130. And if the bill introduced by 2 North Alabama senators becomes law this session, the Lieutenant Governor and Speaker of the House will be authorized to hire more secretaries. Along the same line, a bill sponsored by Senator Hinton Mitchum of Albertville would allow the Commissioner of Agriculture to appoint up to 3 confidential or executive assistants. Most of the bills introduced in the House and Senate could receive committee consideration Wednesday. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.